If ever I wanted a job where every day would be a new thing, absolutely, I have landed there. I mean, the flip side of that, of course, and it's inseparable from it, is if you have a lot to learn, that means there's a lot you don't know.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Defense Never Rests. I'm your host, Megan, and I'm joined by Melissa. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. How you doing?
Good. Just coming off of a crazy weekend here. My kids had this big swim championship thing. So we spent the entire weekend outdoors watching 18 and under year old kids race and get disqualified.
So the girls didn't win.
And they had their own personal victories. We'll say that.
Hey, that's all that matters.
And in fact, I think they didn't make it to the second day of this competition. So we actually yesterday watched the whole freaking thing on TV all day, like streamed it on YouTube, which is,
Wow.
I texted my friend. I'm like, is this like watching golf? Like, what? I
Right.
can't believe I'm watching
right.
like 10-year-old girls swim.
It does feel strange. Hey, you never know.
Yes, but so the swim season is going to close. We have a month off. Now they're again at the pool.
Oh,
Because that's
I was
what you
gonna,
do.
what do they start after this though? Or
More
do they do
More swim and more field
swim.
hockey. But so yes, you and I just had a case of the giggles. How we always just seem to talk about the weather in our intros.
We said no more weather. We can't do this to our listeners.
You guys
It's like bad elevator talk or something, you know, you're like, oh, it's hot out there. It is.
bad. You'll have some like elevator music playing.
That'd be awesome.
So back to today. So today we have on Zach Henderson. And I say this all the time. I feel like this is a little different from our last podcast, but first of all, Zach has an amazing story. I mean, he is just incredibly smart, like blow me away smart. Had like a crazy fun, interesting path through college to law school, and now is at this company called Levels, which is a tech-based company that like monitors what you eat and how the glucose levels impact, you. And it's a startup. So he's here to talk about like what it's like to be the one attorney at a startup, the challenges of like limited funding at a startup, and just the learning curve that he's had from going from working private practice and litigation to basically like a 180 to having to learn about funding and startups and regulations and all sorts of things that are kind of outside of our litigation funnel, I would say.
He's a real Zach of all trades, if you will.
That
was bad.
With
that was bad.
We're gonna bring him in on that note. Good afternoon, Zach. Welcome to Defense Never Rests. How are you today?
Hey there, Megan. I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. Excited to be here and to get a chance to chat.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on. You and I talked, I think it was like months and months ago on the phone, and we had to work a little bit to get this scheduled. So I'm glad we were able to squeeze it in because I know how busy you are at Levels and things are just really like ramping up over there. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with Melissa and I.
Yeah, definitely my pleasure. It was fun connecting in the first place, and when you mentioned the podcast, it just sounded like a great and fun thing to do. So again, just glad to be here.
Well, awesome. So if for everyone who's listens to this podcast, and if you've listened to the podcast, in the beginning, I like to try to dig into, get to know my guests. And so our listeners can get to know who we're talking to and why. And you are an attorney by trade. You went to law school, you practiced for a while. And now you've moved in-house, but how did you come to the point of deciding, law school was the choice you wanted to make? Because all of us have different paths of how we got to where we are, and everyone's is very different. So I'm really curious to hear what yours is.
Yeah, sure. My path was circuitous to say the least. So when I was 14 or 15 or so, for some family reasons, I needed to kind of get started working full time. So I actually, I have the distinction of being a high school dropout. I started working in restaurants and such full time, and found a correspondence program where I could do like my high school basically remote in my evenings when I wasn't working. So I did that, and then went to a junior college sort of concurrently. And for several years, I was a music major. I thought that was going to be it for me. I was interested in composition and French horn performance in a symphony. Turns out that doesn't pay super well. So I did a handful of other odd things along the way. I was a licensed massage therapist for a while. I did restaurants and restaurant management and bartending and service and all of that kind of stuff for years. And basically did that all through undergrad. And I actually changed my major a total of, I think, 7 different times. And this
No way. I don't believe, just in the little I know about you, I don't believe that.
hard to imagine, right? Yeah, so the through line for me is I would say around major 5 or so, I was pretty convinced that I was just a flake. But I wasn't changing majors because I was getting bored of things. It really is just that from my point of view, there's a lot that's very interesting out there. That ultimately explains why I said, enough of this, I need to graduate. English is the way to go. I got an English major with a gender studies minor. English almost entirely because I decided, well, I need something that empowers future learning, something that lets me communicate well, something that will make future learning's easier, because that's really what I want to find a way to turn into a job, is learning full time. And in a pretty big way, that really explains law school and my interest in it as well. I had some social causes that I was passionate about at the time, but overarchingly, I knew that if I didn't study something that required me to go through the process of being a beginner and working up to expert, and then starting that process over and over and over again, I would end up getting too bored and changing things up again. So my bet was that law school and being a lawyer would mean constant learning, and it would mean that I would always have something new to sort of get involved in. And there was an unlikelihood of me sort of becoming bored and deciding, enough of this, let's go do software engineering or something like that. And so far, I would say that bet has paid off. So that's really what led me to law school. What can I do that my full-time job will be learning and going from beginner to expert over and over again? And so specifically, that brought me to litigation.
So before we move on, I am curious, what were these other majors that you had?
Gosh, so some of them are a little combined, but I started with, so music was first, mechanical engineering was second. After mechanical engineering, I decided I loved the physics behind it and not so much the other stuff. So I transferred to from a branch campus of the University of Texas in Tyler, Texas. I transferred to the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. I was a physics major there. And then I had a wonderful professor who was sort of a genius, and one of those who, if she liked you, she just assumed you were as smart as her, even if it was very much untrue. So she convinced me the real way to go was to be a triple major in physics, math, and computer science. I tried that for a few years. I was working full-time throughout that, and I did not succeed. To put it bluntly, I got overwhelmed. I couldn't quit working for financial reasons, so that was a catastrophe. I took a semester off, and then at various points I changed from political science to I think philosophy is in there, and ultimately English. I think I captured them all. I might have missed one, but
that's amazing. I will say I did bounce around majors a little bit. I think I started as a chemistry major, and then I went to biochemistry. And then I realized biochemistry was way too hard.
So hard.
And so then I was like, I like psychology. Let me do that. And then I also had math the whole time. So I was math, and I didn't decide to major in math until I realized I had enough math courses that I was like, well, I don't have to do that much more to finish this one out. And it seemed to balance out the psychology a little bit. So I kind of feel you a little bit, because I had that science stuff too. And then I ended up in like a lesser sciencey thing with the math on the side too. But biochem was like that was like the death of me. I was like, I am never gonna make it through
It
this.
really, that really is the sort of thing where you not only do you have to love it, but you have to be willing to just swim in those waters sort of all day, the whole time that you're in school, because you can't excel at it unless you're kind of becoming an expert just while in school. It's really intense stuff.
Yeah. You had to drop out of high school. So did you eventually just get your GED and then, or did you finish high school out at a different time?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, to clarify that. So this correspondence program that I did, they would
Okay.
basically mail me high school materials. I would
Oh,
do them
wow.
on my own time and then mail them back, and that resulted in an actual high school diploma. So I
Awesome.
ultimately got a diploma. I would say, uh, I took my time with it because I was able to. So I think I actually had. I think as a technical matter, I had an associate's degree before I had a high school diploma. I think,
Wow.
Wow.
just because of the way things worked out. Yeah.
That's incredible. So
It was very useful for me at the time. I would say I'm very grateful that I had that option, because it kind of allowed me to still be a student, at a time when being a student was just really difficult for me.
yeah. And so, and then you end up at University of Chicago Law School, one of the best law schools in the United States. So, you made it all come together. So good for you.
It did work out. I mean, I did have a funny experience of, um, I've had a few folks in my family go to college, but not in any school that anyone would outside of like the given state would recognize. And I certainly went into law school with a lot of imposter syndrome, very much convinced that all of my colleagues would just be infinitely smarter and better educated than me. What I ended up receiving a lot, and actually helped me with not only with my imposter syndrome, but with my suspicion, even still, that I might be a little bit flaky by virtue of changing things up so often. People ended up finding this path that I took pretty interesting, and more than a few people said they wished they'd done something like that. To me, that blew my mind, because when you're living in the world of I'm working full time and going to college and not sure what I want to do with my life, it doesn't feel very exciting or happy. It feels plodding and difficult.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't trade it for anything looking back. I mean, I've done so many things, that sometimes I really do feel like I've lived kind of 3 or 4 different lives, and
Yeah.
that's really neat to kind of have in my head.
Now, was your college experience, so since you were working so much and had so many majors, did you miss out on a lot of the social aspect, or were you just not interested in that?
I would say a little of both. Because of the path that I took, I probably didn't relate as well to many of
Yeah.
my undergraduate colleagues as I otherwise would have. The things
Yeah.
that I sort of needed to care about were different. I'd been surrounded by much older people for a
Mhm.
while, because I've been working from a fairly young age. So I don't think I craved a lot of the more typical undergrad things as much. I did miss it.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I mean, there were certainly aspects of my undergrad that I wish I could have been more involved in. I wish I could have done more clubs and built more friendships that weren't kind of work friendships. Because a lot of my college experience was um, trying to figure out how to arrange my work schedule so that I could run to school, take my classes,
Yeah.
and kind of get back to work or something like that. So I did miss out on a lot of that.
Mhm.
The flip side, though, was I think because I went to a school where a lot of the undergrads were kind of more interested in that and maybe less interested in kind of getting everything out of the educational experience. I do feel like I built great relationships with my professors, and I think what did happen is many of my professors ultimately learned that I was kind of working full time,
Mhm.
and I was also a very engaged student, and that combination meant that teachers were very willing to sort of give me their time.
Yeah.
So sort of a trade off. I probably wouldn't trade my undergrad experience either, though, because I left with wonderful professor relationships.
Yeah. That's awesome. Because do you feel like that? I had some really good professor relationships. Like I say,
Uh-huh.
like one of my math professors, I more say I like majored in Dr. Chang, but
Uh-huh.
but I definitely think like you seem like you had a much more engaging experience and also have those relationships. That's like those are networking relationships that
They
I
are.
wish I saw the value to more when I was going through that whole process than like I see it now. But at the
Yeah.
time I was like, I didn't see the value in that. And you really got to take advantage of that. So that's awesome.
I did, and I'm really grateful for it. And as a result, had some professors go out of their way to help me out even through some financially difficult times in ways that were very unexpected and that kind of I'll never forget. There was because it's a lovely story. I had miscalculated my student loans at one point. It was right before my last semester started. And despite work, I didn't have quite enough to kind of get me over the line. And it was looking like I was going to have to drop a class to afford it, which would have meant one more semester. And so lots of plans that were in place would have disappeared. And I had a professor who actually had retired at that point from teaching and was then in admissions. Her name, she's passed away, but her name is Dr. Montgomery. She was probably in her early 90s then. And she just I just learned that I was gonna have to drop this class, and she chatted me up in the elevator, and it came out that I was dealing with this, and I was pretty bummed. And 2 days later, I found a little envelope in my student box, and Dr. Montgomery had written me a $2,500 check and said, "This is an investment. I expect you to," right. I mean, I choke up even thinking about it now. So, those are the kinds of things that even when things aren't maybe working out, there is something to be said for just kind of giving it your best, because people do notice that. And I think especially people who are our mentors or potentially our mentors, I think we forget how much people are looking for mentorship opportunities. And so I will probably remember that forever. And that's really informed kind of the way that I guess mentor other younger people too. It was such a meaningful experience, not for the money, just for the sentiment of here's this adult who cares this much. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. And then it's just like, you don't even know how to thank her, like it's like what is the appropriate thank you for that? I don't know if there is one,
paying it forward.
Yeah,
maybe,
exactly.
start paying
Melissa,
it forward.
I think you're completely right. I mean, I can't think about that without feeling like a real sense of duty for mentorship in the future, however that manifests itself. Like I have an obligation. I mean, she asked me to pay it forward, as you say. She said, "This is an investment."
Yeah.
I kind of I have to honor that somehow. And so I mean, even telling that story is a small part of honoring how incredible that was. Maybe it was a small thing for her, right? Maybe she was totally fine, and for her it was nothing. But it's the world to the person on the other end.
Oh yeah, and it's just like it kind of just kept. Otherwise, your whole everything would have changed course. And who knows where you would have been now. And, that's amazing. I'm so glad you shared that. So then you're in law school, and then while you're there, did you know that litigation was like the path you wanted to take, or did you kind of fall? Like I fell into litigation out of a result of when I graduated law school. It was just the economy was kind of how it is now.
Yeah.
That was the only job to be had. But you had mentioned that, litigation was something that you felt that was good because it was always something to keep learning about, which I agree. That's 100% what litigation is like, but curious of your thought process going into it.
Yeah. So notwithstanding the fact that here I am not doing litigation, I absolutely went into law school 100% certain that litigation was for me. I mean, I had pondered other paths, but at no point did they engage me. And it really was, it was really for me just the big bet of, I'm pretty sure that what litigators have to do is they have to get very good at this whole process and communicating and being methodical thing. I like fine-tuning my writing and speaking skills. I'm fine to specialize in that, but I would hate to have to specialize in a particular subject matter unless it's something that I just find a true passion for. So I went into it thinking, I think what I want to do is go into a role where maybe for 3 months at a time, I have to become the lawnmowers expert. And then for the next 3 months, maybe I have to become an expert in, name the other thing. And I think that really did prove true in all respects. I mean, both while I was clerking and while I was in practice, one of the things that I did at Kirkland & Ellis, within my first 6 months of joining, Kirkland and Ellis was appointed the federal monitor to Pacific Gas and Electric, the California electric company that was held responsible for some very bad wildfires and such. And a part of my job as a lawyer, quite literally, was going out to like Sonoma and random parts of California, and with the checklist and a subject matter expert looking at power lines. I mean, I just became a power lines expert for like 3 months, and then went back to doing, commercial litigation and False Claims Act stuff and all that. So definitely proved true. Litigation was always what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and that is, it's just, I chuckled a little when you said becoming the lawnmower expert, because I've had a number of lawnmower mowing cases.
Yes.
And it's just, I mean, it's just the nature of what we do. Like, when you just have to learn, especially in products cases, you have to learn everything about that product, so you can down to like the very specifics of the gears and everything. So,
Right.
you become an expert on it. And it's really good, like cocktail party knowledge too, when you want to impress some people with some random shit.
It's totally true.
So you're at Kirkland for a few years, but then you pivot out, and I think that's when you left to come to Levels, right? Or did you do something in between?
No, that was it. Yeah. So my path was law school, and then clerked for a couple of years, and then Kirkland for actually right at a year. And which is funny because I was, Kirkland as a law firm and just big law in general, there's a lot out there where the general understanding is a very small number of people actually like it, and very few people at a place like Kirkland like it at all. They must be lying. I genuinely loved my time there. I loved my work. I definitely did not think I would be going anywhere. Levels was accidental as much as anything. And speaking of products, it really came down to, I fell into some conversations with the CEO and a few others at Levels. And my thinking at the time, honestly, was, oh, cool. I like these people. I like this product a lot. I'll just keep talking with them. Maybe I'll meet someone who would be a great fit for their first legal hire. I was really thinking I'll be in a nice position to keep talking with these friendly people. Maybe they'll be a client of mine one day. Maybe I'll find them a lawyer. And after talking for 6 or 8 months, I just completely fell in love with kind of not only the people and the culture, but their problems, which is, I think, a fun thing that you get to do as a lawyer. Some problems are actually, very fun to deal with. And that was very true of Levels.
First of all, that's like a great example of, again, networking, and how
Yeah.
and so far you were a master at it. Like, of anyone I've spoken
often
to,
accidentally, but yes.
But I think it's the accidental networking that is the most fruitful, because it's the one that's genuine, and you're not doing it for the sole sake of getting something out of it. You're doing it just because you're enjoying the conversations you're having and developing true relationships, and not being like, I'm going to talk to this person because I might get a job. You're like, I'm going to talk to this person because I think they're interesting, and maybe I can find them the right person for a job that they might need. Like, it's a different way to approach it. And I think your genuineness shows through more so than if you're going after like the jugular for the one thing that you want.
I could not agree more. This is something that I look for opportunities to talk about. And, it feeds into a lot of characteristics that I think the very best lawyers do exhibit. One of those things is maybe 2 of them together: genuineness and kindness. Lawyers don't always have a reputation for either of those things. And the lawyers who are very genuine and who do exhibit a lot of kindness and graciousness, people remember you if you exhibit those characteristics. People want to sort of get to know you, and networking from the position of curiosity and, candidly, just from the position of, potentially making friends, really thinking of it less as a networking opportunity and more as, you're an adult, but the world is now your playground. The only way you're going to meet potential friends is by talking to other humans out there. And it just happens that in the process of potentially making good friends or acquaintances, you might make an impression on people. And so many good things have happened to me just from people who I didn't even think about in a professional context, happening to remember some conversation we had at some point, and that snowballs. And you never know when that will happen or from whom that will happen. I mean, a huge mistake is, especially for younger folks, networking only with people who they already perceive to have made it. Short-sighted, because
Yes.
you really can't predict who will be in a position to present that life-changing opportunity that might be your dream job or your dream opportunity. It could come from anywhere. So
Yeah.
Very
That's
true.
so true. And I will, and I'm gonna give Melissa a little kudos here because she's one of those people that exudes kindness. Like
love it.
Oh,
Melissa,
thank you.
well, you're welcome. It's true though. She works on a lot of cases with me, and she's always very kind to counsel. When you're kind, genuinely kind, and not that you're never a pushover, but kind, you kind of get where you need to be without the animosity. Like, what's the
I mean,
point?
nobody wants to talk to a jerk, especially a jerk lawyer. Like that's the worst, right?
Yeah,
I
we
mean, and
already
I
have
think,
that.
yeah, everyone always expects you to be a jerk. So when you're nice, it's like, okay, all right, let's be normal people and just work through this issue. You
Oh,
remove the contempt from it right away.
I completely agree. And, candidly, I tend to find that the lack of kindness is often a crutch for a lack of competence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're competent, you can kind of afford to be kind. You don't need to rely upon sort of tactical ways of interpersonal communication. I mean, there are absolutely strategy and tactics, but they can almost always be executed with integrity. And it's just a better way to practice to have that.
Yes, I agree. I was in a deposition a few weeks ago, and I this one attorney, he was coming from a different city, and I practice a lot in Philadelphia, and I guess maybe Philadelphia attorneys have a reputation for being not the most kind. And
Interesting.
prior to
Just like
this,
they're sports fans.
yeah, I
No
know,
offense. No
wonder-
offense. No offense. I mean, I go to Philly a lot. I'm putting that out there. A little nervous. Sorry.
But I think prior to this deposition, we had kind of a contentious relationship, and I didn't understand why. And then at this deposition, like we had a break, he's like, "Wow, like you're really nice," and I was like, "Well, like, yeah, what'd you expect?" He's like, "I don't know, like I'm a Philadelphia attorney. I just didn't expect you to be nice." I'm like, "We're not all mean." Like, I mean, I'm sure there's some who aren't so nice, but I'm like, that's not like, don't let that soil your view of everybody. But I was like, thank you.
Great.
And then the whole tenor of our relationship changed too, because then going into that, he expected to have to go in like ready with the gloves on to battle,
Yeah.
and thought I was going to be like a jerk to his client during this deposition. I was like, why would I do that? I'm not going to get information by being mean.
Right.
Exactly.
So, so let's talk about levels though, because I don't know if our listeners are familiar with it. So why don't you give us like the I guess the short version of what is levels, and so people have an understanding what we're talking. I keep saying levels. They're probably like, what the hell is she talking about?
Yeah, no, of course. So Levels we are a general wellness focused software company. And in a nutshell, what we do is we create an app where our members are able to import their real-time health data. Things like continuous glucose monitors create glucose data, so they can import those data, as well as data from Apple Health Kit, so maybe their sleep data, stuff like that. And then we help members see that alongside their food and exercise logs. And what that lets them do is actually see how food and exercise affects their personal internal metrics in real time. It's really neat because there are lots of ways to manually record whatever bits of data you have out there and try to synthesize them in some way. But Levels does it with actually real-time data. So you can actually see how that meal that you just ate affects your glucose levels. And having stable glucose is strongly correlated with just wellness and potentially the prevention of lots of conditions and illnesses and such. So it really is a tool that lets people see how their choices affect them right then and there. One way that I like to think about it is if we have like a some kind of a wellness goal, take for example like a weight loss goal, you're kind of locked in for a long commitment, right? Suppose you have a goal of losing 10 pounds. Well, that might be a 3 month goal. So you have to do the thing, and you have to cross your fingers and hope that after 3 months, doing the thing got you where you wanted to go. And that's that. As human beings, that's difficult because we look for patterns. We like feedback, and the feedback loop for something like that is really long. There's a lot of investment at the front end, but the payoff comes way down the road. By contrast, if you can see how that meal that you just had affects your numbers right then and there, the feedback loop is very small, and that feels a lot more actionable and very exciting for us. It's a way of kind of gamifying just being a generally healthy person, and it can give us a tap on the shoulder and say, "Hey, that thing you just did, that was great. Keep that up." Or vice versa. You thought that wasn't too great. You were right. You probably could have passed on that extra cheeseburger in my case, or what have you. So that's what we
How-
do in a nutshell.
How does it know like what's happening in the person's body? Is there like something internal that is like giving the data to the app?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that's where the devices themselves come in. So our members often will be wearing a continuous glucose monitor. So
Okay.
you've heard of like the finger prick monitors. This is basically one of those, but there's not like a needle that stays in your arm or what have you. But it basically just is constantly tracking what your glucose is minute by minute. And so our members are able to share that data with the app. And so they can see their food logs alongside the data that device is producing and kind of line them up. And so that's where the data comes from. They basically whatever health data that members have from devices like that or elsewhere, they're able to bring it into the app and see it all in one place.
So the focus is on the glucose levels when
Yeah, for now, the main focus is glucose, and the main reason for that is continuous glucose monitors are really one of the first and right now one of the only um, uh, real-time windows into what's going on in our body. And it happens that glucose is a very important indicator of our general state of health. Without getting too technical or anything, or stepping outside of my lawyer expertise, your glucose levels and your insulin and insulin resistance are related, and there are pretty strong correlations between how stable your glucose is and your general state of health. And just all kinds of conditions that you might encounter down the road. So even though it's just one data point for sure, it does connect to a lot of things, and it's pretty empowering to even have that to focus on, to have one thing that really feels kind of in your control, and that your food and exercise definitely will have a direct effect on.
Well, and it's also interesting, I guess, to be able to see like immediately, like, oh, this is why I don't feel great after I ate this or drank
Absolutely.
this or indulged in that last night. Like there could be a lot of reasons you're like, oh, well, now I'm looking at my levels. My levels are really low, or my levels are really elevated, or whatever it may be. It kind of gives you immediate answers as to why you're feeling a certain way. Because I know with some of those other tracking devices, there was a time, I think it was like after I had my second kid, I was always like, I was inputting all that stuff. And then the weekend would come and you would have a bad weekend. I'm like, well, I'm not putting that in.
Yeah, no way. That's off the record.
Yeah, I don't want to see that.
I'm not giving that data.
And then you'd be like, well, why haven't I lost any weight?
Megan, this is so real, and this is that tap on the shoulder I talk about. You whether you like it or not, it's keeping an eye on things. It's a really powerful accountability tool. And for some people that's too much, and that's totally fair. But for many of us, it's kind of the thing that we kind of wish we had, right? We really wish we had just a little bit more accountability so that we couldn't just not log the extra serving of ice cream or whatever.
Yeah.
This really prevents us from ignoring sort of the reality of our activity, and just sort of knowing that you can't sidestep it. That alone is usually enough motivation to make a slightly different decision.
So when you stepped in, where were they in like their establishing of like funding and product and everything? Like, were you there in the very infancy, or did you get on a little bit later?
A little later, although, then and now we're still quite young. So
Yeah.
I joined not long after our Series Seed, so the first major fundraising round. Levels has been pretty fortunate to have some fantastic sort of advisors and investors from the beginning. So it's an Andreessen Horowitz funded uh, company, and they've really been wonderful partners and stayed with us, throughout. And so when I joined, I basically joined, and then a month later got our Series A started. And we ultimately, our Series A was around $45 million on a $300 million valuation. So it was, relatively speaking, a quite big
Yeah.
Series A. And so right now, we're a Series A company. We have we're just kind of growing, watching runway. We're probably about 3 times as big as we were since when I joined. I joined when we were 17 or 18 people. We're just now over 50. So headcount wise, we're still very small,
Yeah.
but we have a pretty high functioning team. So it's been great.
So, and you've really gotten to flex those skills of like always wanting to learn something new, because when you came in, what did you know about, startups and funding and Series A and all? Like,
Glucose.
yeah, and glucose.
Yeah. So, Melissa, it's funny you mentioned that. If I am being honest, I probably knew more about glucose than any of those other things.
That doesn't
At
surprise
that
me,
point.
actually. That tracks.
Yeah. So the learning curve, I mean, really, I very much enjoy it. Certainly a be careful what you wish for thing. I mean, I knew I always wanted to be a generalist and have lots of learning opportunities. The curve was and continues to be steep. I mean, always something to learn. And we're a small company, so I'm the only in-house attorney today, and that means my job is equal parts lots of learning and triaging my own time to make sure that I'm really focusing on the right things at the right time and at the right stage of this company. My list of things that I need to become expert on or work on, at a startup, it's a nearly endless list, and so much of the work is just prioritization. So yeah, I didn't know anything about those things though. Very fortunate to have great outside counsel and lots of great sort of resources through having a wonderful network of other attorneys, both in-house and
Yeah.
at law firms.
Would you say that's been one of the biggest challenges coming in, or have you experienced some other things that have been like not roadblocks, but definite like, oh crap, I got to climb up this mountain before I before I make any headway?
Yeah, the learning curve more than anything. Certainly the biggest challenge. I think just starting out, we talked a fair bit about network early on. That too
Mhm.
dovetailed as sort of the biggest struggle, because I knew that, just as a practical matter, so many of the things that I was facing, there were any number of people who absolutely knew the answers to 90% of these questions. Very competent in-house folks and outside counsel who have done this 100 times, 1,000 times, and could give me an answer. But my network wasn't really tuned to in-house work, and so it took me a little bit of time uh, to do reach out and join organizations where I really could build those relationships, so that I am where I am now, which is in a place where if I do have a question, my go-to is often to just pick up the phone or shoot an email to someone in my network, instead of
Yeah.
having to constantly say, oh, is this an outside counsel spend level of a question? Is this a Zach spends a few hours on practical law and hopes he finds the answer question? My starting point is now different. And that's by virtue of now having a really effective network.
Wear like several different types of lawyer hats, so to speak, when you're in-house counsel, because does your client sort of come to you with everything? It seems pretty daunting.
So yes, the
Okay,
client
I
comes
thought
to me
so.
with everything, and it is daunting. I'm very fortunate to work with an executive team that really, first really understands the concept of the tone at the top and really exhibits, integrity and doing things right as best they can, and related to that, really appreciates the importance of having legal be at the beginning of ideas and
Yeah.
decision making instead of kind of coming in at the end to sign off on things. And, I guess I would say, maybe jumping ahead or what have you, but for anyone looking to make the transition in-house, I would say that a real appreciation for the importance of early legal input and a good faith actor mentality, those would be the things above almost anything else that I would be looking for if I were to be making the initial leap from law firm to in-house. I have seen people have very different experiences moving in-house, and so much of it comes down to how does the company and its executive leadership view legal? As a business partner who is there to, find the right risk tuning of something, or are you the blocker that they kind of need to have because someone on their board said it's time to hire a general counsel? Those are two very different companies, and you should always want to be in the first one, not the second one.
Yeah.
Have you been involved sort of at the top in terms of developing a lot of the company's policies or sort of guidebooks, things like that?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm again fortunate that even when I joined the company, we're very heavy on documentation and writing. We memorialize everything. We're a very transparent company. So even when I joined, there was a lot of legwork already done, and I that's a testament to our head of operations and just a really competent leadership team. But after joining, yes, I mean a lot of my work is what we kind of call deep work, which is me carving out big chunks of time to write out the policy documents that we need, to turn it into something that doesn't just sort of sit on the server for no one to ever find, but to turn that into something usable. You said guidelines. I think about everything that I write that is client facing as something like a guideline or a guardrail, something that is really designed to be read. And because it's designed to be read and used, I want it to be accessible to non-lawyers. It's not going to be legalese. And so a lot of my time I spend thinking about, all of these questions that I'm getting. How do I synthesize that into a package that I can hand to the team, and that can be their new first stop for questions like that?
Right.
Yep.
So one thing that just came to mind though, so your users use like the glucose monitor. Are you is Levels providing the glucose monitor, or is that something your users purchase on their own and it connects to your tech, and then you get the data from your tech? Like I'm thinking too from like a claims perspective, like if you're providing the product and it's like that could be an open a very large avenue for potential
liability.
claims. Yeah,
Megan, it's a great question. So we do not hold the devices or own the devices ourselves. So we, if someone comes to Levels and expresses an interest in being a Levels member, we will direct them to an independent, and I truly mean independent, sort of third-party physician. They will work with that physician, and if that physician determines that what's called a CGM or continuous glucose monitor is right for them, then they may obtain a prescription, and only once they have that and sort of device in hand do they come back to Levels, and then we can say, all right, great, you have this thing, and then we go through the consenting process of them sharing their data with us. And I would note too that we don't actually take the data from the device itself. The data goes to a database, and then the database gives data to us. So there's even that extra layer of protection where it's not even like the app is programmed to pull from the device. When we receive the data, at that point, it's really just a number in a sequence of numbers that we just display. So really, functionally, the Levels General Wellness app is functioning just as a display for their glucose data that they've shared with us.
and that does insulate you from some risk when you have those, especially when you add the physician layer to it, and then it's not just anyone, like it's not like a watch that anyone could purchase, like especially because it's a little more invasive in a way as to like I just think about HIPAA, like personal data, like it's a little more invasive than just monitoring your heart rate, so so that extra layer, I think it just it insulates some liability for that potential liability that you would have.
I think that's right, and we've been quite conscious we've been quite conscious not only of the liability side of things, but also you mentioned HIPAA and just how we handle data and just making sure that as a company, not only are we baseline complying with data privacy rules and regs, but are really acting as data stewards for our members. I think the thing that I find myself saying most often internally is just a reminder that we are, most companies are, but Levels in particular, we are a data company. We are really stewards of, even though people have quite openly shared it with us, we have every obligation to make sure that those data are very much
Yeah.
protected and always used in the right way. We take a lot of pride in that. We don't sell data or anything like that. I guess probably spend a lot more time than other companies on things like our privacy policy and living up to it. But great points and super important to us.
Yeah, I should introduce you to Melissa. Who do we had on so relatively recently about talking about cybersecurity? She connects you guys.
Yes, exactly.
Might be a good person if you haven't talked to someone yet.
Speaking of networking.
I love it. Yeah, I will say on that point, speaking of new things to learn, it has become, I did not spend any time in privacy and security prior to joining Levels, and it's something that I have loved, progressing from beginner to journeyman to near expert on. It has become a real passion, in part because I think Levels, thankfully it's not unique now, but there aren't a great many companies that prioritize it as much as we do, outside of just really needing to check the regulatory boxes. But just from taking my lawyer hat off and putting my just citizen hat on, it's something that I care about a whole lot, and it matters to me that my executive team cares about it a lot too.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I feel like from talking to you so far that you've probably found like the perfect job, because you started this off saying you went in, you wanted to go into litigation because you always wanted to learn and have something to learn. And now you're not in litigation, but I don't think there's probably a day that you don't have to learn something new and become an expert on it. It seems like that's like the course of your of every day now.
You got what you wished for.
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth to that. Yeah, I mean, if ever I wanted a job where every day would be a new thing, absolutely, I have landed there. I mean, it's not without its very real challenges. I mean, the flip side of that, of course, and it's inseparable from it, is if you have a lot to learn, that means there's a lot you don't know. And being a solo attorney at a fast-moving startup that deals, for example, with members' health data, there's a real obligation to get smart on topics very, very quickly. As any lawyer has experienced, if you really care about the work you do, there's a level of existential dread that comes with the potential of making a mistake. And I think that is the real challenge for me personally, of working in a space that enables me to learn so much. It's not just that I am allowed to learn so much; it's that I have to learn so much.
Yeah.
And there's not really any room for me to say, I'm not going to spend the extra time learning that thing today.
Yeah. And I'm sure I don't know is not an appropriate answer. Like, unlike during depositions when you say I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer as long as a truthful one, I don't think you can get away with saying I don't know. You might be like, I'll look into that and get back to you.
I think that's right. And to be fair, I will say, I've built up enough trust that I can pretty confidently say I don't know, but it is always followed up with what you just mentioned. It is I don't know, and I will soon know. I will do the research myself. I will make some calls. I will reach out to outside counsel, what have you. There's a lot of just triaging. Again, is this the kind of thing that I need to get smart on personally, or is it something that I should hand off? And it's funny on this point about learning. Maybe the one sad thing that I've encountered is, even though I like to learn a lot about many different things, I do like to deep dive, and litigation lets you deep dive for sure.
Oh, yeah.
In-house, though, it's sort of this funny place where if you encounter a topic that really needs you to do 10 or 15 or more hours on, there's a good chance that that's the kind of thing you should hand off to outside counsel or somebody else. And so that's the downside a little bit is I'm allowed to be a generalist. I'm allowed to know a little bit about a lot. That's an expectation. But I really do have to be careful not to get excited and go down the rabbit hole too far, because that's not always a good use of my time.
Right.
No, and you've very limited time to do
Yeah.
many things. You're probably pulled
That's
in
right.
many directions on each individual day. Like, do you ever like are you able to separate your work life from your home life? Like, are you able to like at some point be like, okay, I'm closing it up today and I need to step away? Or is it that constant that it's really hard to pry yourself away?
At this stage, I think a little bit of double-edged sword. In general, the answer is yes, I can, and that's by virtue of having a really good team, a lot of organization, sort of great assistance, so that I can usually unplug and feel confident that if something is a genuine emergency, somebody will send me a text, but I will never get a text unless it's an emergency. In other
Right.
words, the communication channels are very clear, and uh, uh, non-emergencies go in these buckets. Emergencies go to my phone, and so if I do step away, I can be confident that if my phone doesn't buzz, I'm okay. So that's a huge benefit. I think another thing is, because of our size, and we just don't have a super big bank account, and we're really careful about data. We're not really yet a target for a lot of the typical trolls that you will see appear as companies grow and their bank accounts and exposure becomes a lot larger. So a lot of the fire drill like stuff that companies encounter, that's our future, but we're not quite there yet on the sort of standard company scale. The flip side, though, is I'm the only lawyer. So if I do step away, then that means, figuring out a way to balance my workload between handing things off to non-legal folks where I can, and, bringing in outside counsel for, to kind of keep an eye on things for a week or two. And that's an expensive bit of time off. So I have to be conscious of that. So it's a trade-off.
I mean, that's something that I think is lost in a lot of people. Like, you might say, oh, we raised X amount in funding, and it sounds like multi-millions of dollars, and that sounds like a lot, but it is still pretty lean when you're running a company and you have to develop product, and like there's all these costs associated with, like, I think people, that is lost on people, that the money it's not endless flow.
I think that's right. Yeah. And if you're in the startups space, it's sort of it's often taken for granted that there's a fairly large period of time between when a company sort of comes into existence and when they are genuinely profitable. But as it turns out, like the concept of a runway, which is how much cash you have in the bank until you will run out, that's really the thing that's on startups' minds all the time. And so things like legal spend for a company that is still sort of proving themselves, finding what's called product market fit, that's a very different world for a company to live in as compared to a company that is profitable, is paying dividends, that kind of thing. Those are just very different worlds.
Yeah. I even you saying the word runway in the sense that you're running out of money, that gives me heart palpitations. Right. And I don't even work for you.
Right. Well, and that you react that way, I will say I have learned from an inside counsel perspective to be very grateful that that's your reaction, because a major challenge especially from a smaller startup's perspective, is finding really competent outside counsel that does appreciate that. Billing is something that associates and partners do as a matter of course, and rarely does an associate truly agonize over what they build for a thing. And probably rightly so, do the work, bill what it took you. But on the in-house counsel side, especially of a small company, that extra hour matters. And not only, I think where outside counsel sometimes don't appreciate the perspective of a small company is, it's not just that hour matters, it's that extra hour, though maybe just $400 or maybe just $1,000, might be the difference between we love our outside counsel and gosh, this is so expensive. I think we need to go shopping.
Yeah.
And it really could just be that one extra hour that just feels a little bit off.
Yeah.
And some outside counsel are really wonderful at appreciating that concept of runway and how sort of careful startups have to be. And then some tend to treat Series A and small companies just a lot like they're more enterprise clients, and that often results in a mismatch, which is too bad.
Yeah. And it's funny that when you mentioned like associates worrying about like what they're billing, and I remember when I was a young associate, I didn't worry at all about
Right.
what I was billing. I only worried about if I was billing enough. But I think that was also the place you were supposed to be. Like, don't think about
Precisely.
how much time you're spending on this. Just do it right. And like
Exactly.
my time probably got cut, a lot of it on before it went to the client, which is, that's the partner's job.
Exactly.
But they didn't want me also to worry about like, oh, I better rush. So because I don't know. It wasn't until later in your career when you're a little more established and you know what you're doing that you can be more conscious of your time. But as like a first, second year associate, you're gonna have to run down that rabbit hole
That's right.
sometimes.
That's right.
Like, a lot of times you're looking for that needle, and it's gonna take a few hours.
It's completely true. And being on that end of it, I mean, I get it, and I completely respect it. And you mentioned the ultimate point is it is, it's the partner's job to really interface with inside counsel and have a clear understanding of, hey, are we actually able to meet this client's needs at this price point, or do we need to have a discussion, or what? I mean, that really can be a phenomenal relationship, or one that ends surprisingly quickly. And it's not often well explained to outside counsel why that relationship is ending, but it often is things like that. That this extra hour was just a little bit too much.
No, and do you ever explore doing like fixed fee arrangements with some of your outside counsel to control those costs?
Yeah, I have looked into it, and there's a good chance that with respect to some matters, I will go that path. I haven't yet. I definitely have colleagues who have done so and have been pretty happy with it. It's not something that I have yet done. So stay tuned. Maybe maybe a year from now, I will have a lot more experience trying it out. But for now, all of my outside counsel is on hourly.
Yeah. So, what, without disclosing any company proprietary secrets, like what's next for levels to the extent that you can share?
Somewhat limited, but I think really what's on the radar for us is taking this idea that metabolic health really matters, and that just keeping an eye on your numbers, keeping an eye on your glucose can make a real difference in your general health. Growing that idea is the big number one. In terms of how a company like us grows, we are in an interesting place because we're fairly expensive. For a member to be able to get a continuous glucose monitor, they're not cheap, and so we would love for the industry to become just more affordable for people. In terms of sort of our plans, though, it really at this point is just growth. We are looking to scale. We've really just now, I would say, as of like a month ago, gotten to a point where we are able to grow and scale. So that's really what's next.
Yeah.
Also this idea of product market fit. Getting to a place where what we are creating and putting into the market really is the version of the thing that people want and need and will use. We've up until recently, we grew an incredible wait list of something like 200,000 people, and now that we're live, there is no more wait list. Now people are joining, and we're all in. But this really gives us the opportunity to just tweak product and make sure that we're putting the best version of ourselves out there. So this next year is really just growth and listening really, really thoughtfully to our member feedback.
Yeah, and that's such an important thing though too. You can't just grow as you want. You have to grow as your people need. Otherwise you're going to lose your people.
It's very true. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to be creating something that is really affecting in a positive way the people who you intend to use it. They're the market.
Yeah. For sure. So, looking back on your path and, where you've been and where you are now, is there any advice that you would give to your younger self?
Oh, to my younger self.
Your younger self's too busy.
I
Take a nap. That's the
You know
advice.
what?
Sorry.
Honestly, Melissa,
Sorry to interrupt
no,
your train
no,
of
no.
thought.
I so much appreciate it because that honestly is probably the best advice. So I was I justified my workaholism as being a happy workaholic. And what I have since learned, and working at Levels is actually very good about this because I think it's, in general, a very thoughtful and the culture here is a very work healthy culture. Zach, even though you consider yourself a happy workaholic, that's not a good reason to not unplug sometimes. There is enormous personal and emotional importance to stepping away from things. Just because you have an extra 3 hours in your day doesn't mean you ought to stuff it full of some new thing. One thing that I did for years, a few years before law school and even through law school and beyond, was I also taught the LSAT because I really loved it. Just super nerd.
What?
And yeah, and
Wait,
I
Martin,
taught.
you have to go back to that. Like the Elsa. Do you like the logic games?
I love.
Oh,
Melissa,
God.
the
I
logic
love it.
games.
I
Where
love
were
it
you?
all.
Where were you when I was taking the LSAT? Oh, God.
They were my favorite part, and I heard they're getting rid of them, and I was like, oh, that was like actually the fun and games part of that whole damn test.
Fun
Yeah, well,
games. Oh, God.
I have strong feelings. I hope the LSAT never goes away. I love it so much. And listen, I certainly understand anyone who thinks me crazy or thinks Megan and me crazy. But
I do.
I loved it. But all that said, I taught my first. I taught my all through law school too, and that would have been the perfect place for me to just say, Zach, like chill out. Like just because you can teach the LSAT, you shouldn't. Enjoy this thing. Enjoy this amazing, beautiful, just educational experience. You don't have to do everything. You can do some things and just breathe a little. So yeah, that would be my advice. And I think attorneys in general need that advice.
Yeah.
The thing about being good at the law, a law school mentor of mine said the reward for the legal pie eating contest is more pie.
Yes.
It's so true. Change your diet up a little bit. Don't eat pie all the time. Step back. That's okay.
Yeah. One of the partner I used to work with used to say that all the time too. But
Yeah.
back to the logic games, Melissa,
Sure.
you would not enjoy this, but I enjoy this. Like I buy logic game books and do them on planes. Like that is my like activity on a plane, is to do those games. Like I love them.
I do Sudoku. Does that count? Is that a logic game?
Counts.
All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
But I
Yeah,
love that it's like,
ugh.
Harry, was born 15 years ago and he, has that pineapple, and Joe was his neighbor and he doesn't like, I love that shit.
You probably both got really good LSAT scores.
I did really well on the logic games.
I bet you did.
not the reading comprehension as much. Logic games, though, I had that in the bag.
If
Oh,
only
I
you
love
and
it.
I could have taken one test, then we would have gotten into Harvard on a full scholarship. We would have gotten 100 on the LSAT.
Oh, woods.
Oh, well, exactly.
But I do think that's a really excellent though advice, though, is to learn to like not always have to fill your time with all the things and like take that much needed breather.
Yeah.
And I think it is a part of this profession, is that a lot of us in this profession have a hard time like taking that breather, like because there's always more work to do. It
Yes.
never ends. Like you can always do more, but it's very important to step away, so then when you are doing it, you're actually putting your focus in rather than just being like totally burnout and not even
Burnout.
realizing how burnout you are.
That's a great point. I mean, stepping away for any period of time is often the best way to ensure that the work that you are doing is really work that you're proud of, that is of its highest caliber. So it's about our mental health, but it's also about maintaining quality. Burnout is absolutely real, and look, I mean, the law is for all of the ways in which it can be frustrating. We are in a profession where we get to think basically for a living. That is really special, but it is still work. and it is still possible to very much burn out from thinking too much. And so I think there's something to be said about protecting protecting our love for something. And often the way to protect our love for a thing is to not do it in an all-consuming way. Let there be enough space so that it is something that you can go to and step away from, or else it will just become purely work, and that enjoyment will at some point likely fade.
Yeah. It goes for everything, I mean, even if it's something that like if you're a runner and you love to run, and then sometimes you can run too much and then you get injured, or then you start to hate running, so you've turned something that it was so good for you into something bad. So one last question before I let you go. You had mentioned, you think you played the French horn. Do you play that piano behind you?
I do. I actually got so I didn't play piano when I was younger. I actually I worked really, really hard to get like a paid 1L summer job. And I told myself, I really want to learn how to play the piano. If I get a paid summer job, I will use the money and get a piano. So I actually bought and started learning the piano in law school. And so I don't play as much as I did then, but I started playing basically right after 1L, and still play a bit.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I envy your musical talent. I don't have any of that.
Well, I have musical interest. I think I'm far away from talented nowadays. I mean, remember, I did change my major from music. So read into it as you will. But I definitely love it. So.
Well, and I mean, that is a great outlet, though. I mean, that is something that you can do, even though it's filling time. It's tapping into a different portion of your brain and your body. That it is an outlet, I think.
Yeah.
Different form of exercise. Well, Zach, I appreciate you so much for coming on and talking to us about levels and everything. All the exciting things that your company is doing, and just sharing, your story. I think your story is super, super interesting. And, I honestly, before you came on, I didn't know I was going to get this amazing story out of you. So, so a lot of people was like, oh, I was an English major, I didn't know what else to do. So I became a lawyer. Like that's the typical path. So thank you so much for sharing.
Well, thanks for having me. I loved talking with you both, Megan and Melissa. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
For our listeners out there, can you just let them know where they can find you or Levels if they have any questions, or if it's something that, it's a product that they might be interested in. I'd love them to be able to reach out to you or the company and get more information.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in Levels, you can check us out at levelshealth.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm just Zach Henderson, and Zach is just spelled Z-A-C. And if anybody listening wants to chat, do feel free to reach out. I'm always excited to meet and talk with new people.
Well, thank you so much. And, again, for everyone listening, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to the Defense Never Rests on Apple Podcasts. And you can also find us at TDNR Podcast on YouTube. Thank you.